Assalamu alaikum students. Today's lecture is about Romanticism or Romantic movement. This literary movement and a profound shift in sensibility took place in Britain throughout Europe from 1770 to 1848. In our last lecture, we covered about Age of Revolution, in which we discussed that there were a lot of economic, social, and political changes which were coming in Europe during 17th century. So the after effect of all those changes was on the poetry and art and literature, which we are going to learn in this lecture, and it was named as Romanticism. The words romantic or romance originally referred to medieval tales of knights written in the original Roman language, Latin. These tales often included love stories between a knight and his lady, resulting in the modern meaning of romance. When talking about the Romantic era in literature, we are actually referring to romantic as freely imaginative fiction and not romantic as in romantic love. So, when we talk about Romanticism, we do not refer to the feeling of romance or the way we conceive the word in today's world. We look at romance as a love affair between a girl and a boy. But when we talk about the literary movement of romantics, we refer to something else. What that something else is, I'm going to cover it in the later slides. So, what were the reasons for emergence of this romantic movement? It was basically Oriental mysticism, French Revolution, pre-Romantic period, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Isaac Newton, and John Locke. First of all, Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke were the two philosophers who came in the age of during the age of revolution, that is 17th century, and they proposed their ideas like other many philosophers. They were of the opinion that human beings should raise their voice for their rights and they should not be suppressed by any monarch. And that is why monarchy was overthrown by French people during the French Revolution. And the biggest change that politically came during French Revolution was that people now were coming to the parliamentary system, and they did not further believe in the absolute right of any king. Furthermore, when we look at the Arabian Peninsula and when we look at the Emirates and Turkey and such spaces, there was a lot of mysticism which was proliferating. Means Sufism. People were religiously spreading a love of humanity among masses. And then Isaac Newton, who was one of the famous scientists, and he discovered gravity during this period of before romanticism, and that is why this pre-romantic period overall changed into romantic emergence, especially in poetry. Age of reason versus romantic era. Now I'm going to compare how these two ages were different. In the age of reason, writers stressed on reason and judgment, concerned with the universal experience, the value of society as a whole, and the value of rules. So when I say reason and judgment, people were more focused on how should they logically be perceiving things, what kind of political system should they follow, what kind of educational system should prevail in the society, and their concerns were universal as a whole on the society. And the rules that they were proposing, for example, how should children be educated, or how or what kind of political system should prevail, they were all the questions which were concerned with the bigger level on the society. On the other hand, when we look at the romantic era, the writers were more stressing on imagination and emotion, concerned with the particular experience, the value of individual human being, and the value of freedom. Now, what does it mean? When we look at imagination and emotion, the writers were more concerned with the human feelings, how human beings feel in particular situation or an experience, or what is the value of an individual, or what is the value of a human being in a society. And they were actually more concerned with the value of freedom. So William Wordsworth, who was one of the poets from this era, he proposed this new explanation of poetry or definition of poetry, where he said that poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. He says, when we look at the previous era, what kind of poetry was being produced? Most of the poetry was very logical. They used to follow verses and metric system, and there was the composition was always very balanced. But when we look at romantic poetry, we see that romantic poetry is actually the outcome of some feeling which or some experience which the poet is going through. For example, William Wordsworth has written Daffodils, which is a poem written on flowers, how he felt looking at those daffodils. It was pretty simple. Before this era, the poetry which was written was all either related to social representation, for example, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, or was about kings and courts. So now the poetry was completely changed. This is one of the graphic image which tells you about what romanticism is about. The feelings or the powerful feelings that you get looking at such scenic beauty around you. So romanticism is all about appreciation of beauty and having aesthetic sense. Romanticism speaks about subtle sense of mystery, a complex sense of awe in the presence of the unknown and wonder in the presence of the unknown, an exquisite response to the manifestation of beauty. We can explain this feeling through an idea that when you experience huge mountains, when you are in a scenic beauty, when you stand in front of a big sea, you have this feeling of awe, you have this feeling of amazement. You're shocked at the hugeness of nature, and at the same time you're enjoying the beauty. So there are two feelings which are going on inside you. One is the feeling of amazement and horror, that how big and how huge is the natural beauty, and other is the sense of enjoyment, that you are actually relishing that particular moment. These kind of elemental simplicities of life are projected in romantics because they were against industrial revolution, and they did not want people to move away from rural life to urban life. Elemental simplicities of life explain that people should go back to nature. They should idealize and talk about childhood, and the writers found inspiration in simple elements of life like ordinary sunset, a walk over hills, a cluster of spring flowers, a song of a nightingale. Now, the poets, usually the topics that poet used to pick in their poetry were ordinary sunset, walk over hills, cluster of spring flowers, and song of nightingale. Like there are number of poems in which a poet is admiring the beauty around them, talking about the beauty around them, and relishing and experiencing and discussing that experience with the readers. The main characteristics of romantic era are common man and childhood over urban sophistication. Romantics believed in the natural goodness of humans, which is hindered by the urban life of civilization. They believed that the savage is noble, childhood is good, and the emotions inspired by both beliefs causes the heart to soar. They say that people were moving from rural areas to urban areas, and that an industrialization was spreading. So what did they say? The writers or the poet were of the opinion that people should move towards simpler life rather than towards sophistication and civilization, because they believed that the more savage is more noble. People should stick to real nature because nature is beautiful. Emotions over reason. Romantics believe that knowledge is gained through intuition rather than deduction. This is best summed up by Wordsworth, who started that all good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. So, what were the poets before this time doing? For example, Chaucer picked up ideas around him and he represented the characters of the society ironically. On the other hand, what romantic poets are doing. Romantic poets are discussing flowers, hills, natural beauty. What are they doing? They have gained knowledge around the natural beauty, and they're talking about emotions. They're not talking about reason and logic anymore. Nature over artificial. They're paying more attention towards the natural beauty, and they're presenting it linguistically. Romantics stress the awe of nature in art and language and the experience of sublimity through the connection with nature. Romantics rejected the idea of industrial revolution. This is something that which I have already explained, They are explaining the idea of sublimity, how one feels in front of the beauty and how he should or she should uh, admire that beauty and enjoy that beauty. The individual over society. Romantics often elevated the achievements of misunderstood heroic individual outcasts. They say that only knights are not the heroes, only people with swords and soldiers in the battlefields are not the heroes. Rather, the people in the real life are heroes, and they can be projected as heroes through little act of kindness. Imagination over logic. Romantics legitimize the individual imagination as a critical authority. They said that anything which is imaginable and natural and emotional is beautiful. Not necessarily should it be logical. For example, logic asks people to earn more money and go towards industrialization. What emotions ask? Emotions ask you to live in the rural areas and enjoy that rural beauty. This is it for this lecture.